There are noise reduction tools in both Photoshop and Lightroom, so why would you bother paying for a plugin? I'm going to have a look at two popular ones, one that I've used a lot and one that I've just tried based on a recommendation from a student in a class, and see how they go. Well, cheers. I hope you're well. I hope you're safe. Shameless plug and product placement. Plymouth Gin and Fever Tree Tonic. As a long-standing paying customer, if you're interested, either of you, in sponsoring this channel, please get in touch with me. But on more serious matters, the world's a crazy place at the moment. Australia's just gone into another level of shutdown, certainly in the state of Victoria, but I think we're in a better position than many countries in the world, so nothing to complain about. As I've spoken about in a previous video, I've got an ongoing heart complaint. I'm also an asthmatic, and that puts me into a higher risk category. So the family have effectively isolated me from the universe. I'm in shutdown, I'm at home, and my wife is still going out and shopping and walking the dog and going to the post office, and that's about it. So I'm stuck at home, can't be out shooting videos and wildlife photography and landscape photography. So I'm going to be doing a few product reviews and some reviews of software. And I'm going to start today with a look at some noise reduction software. And I'm doing this because I've been teaching classes for the last year in landscape photography and an introduction to digital cameras. And a lot of people talk about noise reduction and how we do it in processing and so on. And in those classes, we haven't done a lot of processing work, but a couple of people have spoken to me about the Topaz Labs product, DeNoise AI, which I haven't used up until I tested it for this review. I've been a long-term user of the Macphun Creative Collection, but I try to be as ubiquitous as I possibly can with regard to operating systems and software and so on. And Macphun, obviously by its name, is a Mac-only product. As far as I know, does not have a PC version. So I'm going to do a quick comparison. This is not a true product review, nor is it a tutorial on noise reduction. I'm going to go through some very quick noise reduction procedures in Lightroom and in Photoshop using the native tools that they have, and then show you how I use Macphun very quickly and compare that with Topaz and see which one comes out on top. So let's give it a go. All right, let's get into this. To test the various options for noise reduction that I've got available, I obviously wanted an image that had a fair amount of noise in it. And rather than trawl through 150,000 images in my collection, I thought the easiest thing to do would be to go back and find one of the earliest digital images that I have. And this one was taken on a Pentax IST-D camera, the first Pentax digital camera and the first digital SLR that I had. And you can see here that it's got a 6 megapixel sensor, and it's shot here at 1/50th of a second at f4.5 at ISO 3200. The shot was of, obviously, a bookshelf in a bookstore. It's in Seattle, Washington, and it was in a quite dark and dingy corner of the bookstore, and so I obviously needed to bump the ISO up. And if we have a close look into this corner here, and if I bump that up to 2:1, you can see there's a fair amount of noise here. In fact, there's a ridiculous amount of noise, particularly in the dark areas. There's both luminance noise, and if we look at the color area over here, there's a fair amount of chromatic or color noise as well. So let's have a look at the Detail tab in Lightroom. If we open that up, we're not going to do any sharpening because I just want to see the effect of the noise reduction. And we've got the luminance slider and the color slider and the various options to affect those. So let's start with the luminance slider and push it up all the way to 100, and you can see how much of that noise has been pulled out of this. In fact, it's turned this into a very flat looking image with not a lot of detail in it. But we can slide the detail slider up as well to pull some of that detail back. And if we pull the luminance back to 0, you can see that we've retained some of the detail, but we've lost a lot of the noise. So it's just a matter of finding the right balance here of detail and luminance, and then contrast underneath that to pull some of the detail out but lose the noise. Now that looks okay, except for the amount of colour noise that's in here. The luminance slider does not affect colour noise, it's only affecting luminance noise, which are the pixels that are brighter or darker than they should be. So if we go down to the colour slider and slide that up all the way to 100, you can see that has taken out all of that colour noise. It's been really effective in doing that. But we don't need to push it all the way to 100. If we slide it back to about 30, you can see there are just a few little spots in here of colour. So we push that up until they disappear, and they've gone by the time we get to about 40. So we can then, if we want to, mess with the detail again and push some of that detail back, which seems to have a good effect on giving us some of the expected grain in here without pushing the colour noise back up. And then we can push the smoothness slider in to reduce the edginess a little bit on some of that grain. So I'm quite happy with that in terms of what I can get out of this filter in Lightroom. So to compare the other noise reduction software options I've got, I'm going to shift this into Photoshop, but first I'm going to create a virtual copy, and I'm going to reset that to its original, and then I'm going to select both of those and go to Edit In, Open as Layers in Photoshop. So here we are in Photoshop, and I'm just going to bump the resolution back up to 200% and go and find our wizard book and its spot on the bookshelf so that we can make the comparisons. So this is the layer that was adjusted in Lightroom. So I'm going to just go over here and label that as Lightroom Noise Reduction. And this one is obviously the original, so I'm going to label that as original. And I'm going to make a copy of this by clicking on Command-Control-J. And I'll label this one as Photoshop Noise Reduction. I'm going to hide this one and drop it down below here so that I'm always working on the top layer. The Photoshop Noise Reduction tool is under Filter, Noise, Reduce Noise. There are a number of other options here, but this one is the one used for the straight noise reduction. Okay, so the Reduce Noise filter window pops up. I'm going to increase this to 200%. So that's the same view if I slide this up to our wizard book, the same view as we had in Lightroom. And you'll notice that there are some presets that this opens with. I'm going to shut all of these down to 0. I certainly don't want any sharpening because I didn't sharpen anything in Lightroom, but I want to set those to 0 so we can see what this looks like at the beginning and then see the effect of the various sliders as we go. Firstly, if we try and remove some of this luminance, and I'll push this all the way up to 10, you can see that that's had a similar effect to what Lightroom did, but it's not quite as good as pulling out some of the noise. There's still a fair bit there. And I can push the details back the same way that we did in Lightroom and so on. And I sort of like it about here. If I click and hold on the preview window, it shows me the original, and if I let go, it shows me the effect that I've had. So I can push that preserve details up a little bit further. Yeah, that's okay. Now the color noise, if I move over to this wooden bit, that's still the same. So obviously, any luminance filter is not going to affect color noise, but if I push the color noise all the way up to 100%, That's done a similar thing to the way that the Lightroom effect had, which was to pull it out. But if I pull this back, now unfortunately the preview only happens once I let go, so I'm going to have to sort of jump back down. At 33 I'm getting a fair amount of that noise still there. If I push it up to 41%, there's still a fair amount there. So it's not as efficient as removing the color noise as the Lightroom one, but that looks reasonably good at about 50%, and I don't want any sharpening in there. So I think that's about as good as I can get it here. So I'll click OK. And now, if we look at the original Lightroom and the Photoshop noise reduction tool, I don't think the Photoshop tool is anywhere near as good as the Lightroom tool for pulling luminance noise out. The color reduction is just about as good, but the luminance is not. All right, so let's have a look at my usual go-to tool for noise reduction, and that's the Macphun Creative Kit tool called Noiseless. So once again, I'm going to create a copy of my original, slide it up to the top, rename it Macphun, and I have the Macphun Creative Kit installed as a plugin, so I can go directly up to Filter, Macphun Creative Kit, and choose Noiseless. Now this is opened, I can slide up to the area that we're interested in, and there are two really cool things about this interface. One is that the system comes with a series of presets, and secondly, if you don't want to use the presets, you can go to Adjust and you can change a range of these filter settings which enable you to get a fine-tuned effect to suit your needs. But 95% of the time, the presets seem to meet my needs. Now, I've been using this tool for a long time, so I can pretty much judge that the medium setting here is going to kill off this amount of noise. And you can see the effect that's had. The other thing I really like about this tool is this sliding split screen in the middle. So I can move this backwards and forwards across the area that I'm concerned with to see the effect of that filter. Now this medium setting has taken all of that noise out, but it's really flattened it a little bit too much. So I'm going to go to my other favorite one, which is balanced. And this one has a little less noise reduction, but it still maintains a little bit of texture as well. So you can see here there's just a little bit of texture, but most of that noise has been reduced. And if we go back to medium, let that render, you can just bounce backwards and forwards and see which one you prefer. So I'm going to prefer the balanced one as a starting point. And now I do want to adjust this a bit because it's pulled too much of the texture out of the midtones in this wood by removing all of that color. So if I go to adjust, one of the things that I can do is that I can bump the details up quite significantly here. And if I push that all the way up to 100, you can see that some of this texture in the wood has come back, but I've pulled a bit too much texture back into this darks in here. So I can slide these up and protect the shadows and protect the highlights because I don't want to add noise to these brighter spots. And I can reduce the mask on the midtones, which gives me a nice amount of texture in here, and it doesn't affect these dark tones or the highlights very much at all. So I think that's enough to demonstrate this tool. So I just click apply, and now we're back in Photoshop, and you can see if I go back to my original, you can see the original and the effect that we have been able to pull out a huge amount of noise there with just a couple of clicks and a couple of sliders. So that's all very well, but the challenge here is that the Macphun Creative Kit is only available on a Mac. So if you're not using a Mac, or you are using a Mac and you prefer to use something else, then Topaz Labs have brought out a new tool called DeNoise AI. And so we'll have a look at that one now. So once again, select original, make a copy, put it up to the top, change the name. And again, like Macphun, I have the Topaz tools installed as plugins, so I can go up to Filter, Topaz Labs and choose Topaz DeNoise AI. Now this is opened and I can again slide up to the area that I'm interested in. Once again we get a split screen here, but this split screen does not have the slider in it like the Macphun tool does, but it enables me to preview the effect of the filter against the original side by side. I can go to single if I want to, and that just shows me the preview without the original, but I can go back to the split because I prefer to see them side by side. Now, there are two options here under the mode selection. You can choose manual, which means you can slide the amount of noise you can remove. I'm going to pull the sharpening right down anyway, because once again, like all the other tools, I don't want any sharpening in here. And it comes with a preset when you open it up, but I can just switch to auto if I want to and forget about all that and just see what the system tells me I want to do. Now that's pulled a bit of noise out of the really dark areas, but not much out of some of the other areas, and it hasn't pulled much of the colour out. But there's a chroma noise reduction strength slider here that I can slide that up, and that's pulled all of that out, which has worked quite well. And I can slide that back until that looks pretty good. But I still prefer to get rid of more of this luminance noise. So I'm going to go back to manual and notice that it's kept my chroma noise reduction strength, so I don't have to reset that. Pull the sharpening out again and just bump this noise up. If I push it all the way to 100 and let that render, you'll see how much of that noise it's pulled out. It's a huge amount, and it's left enough detail to sharpen up the lettering on these books, which is really good. It might be a little bit too much, so I'm going to push it back to about 90 just to see what effect that has. And I quite like that, but I'd like to recover a little bit of the detail as well if I can. So I'm going to slide the original detail up a little bit. Too much. So I usually go by halves, go back to 20. And that one looks pretty good. So I'm just going to save that. So once again, we are back in Photoshop. We've got the original with lots of noise, both luminance noise and color noise. The Lightroom noise reduction tool worked pretty well, but it just blocked up a bit of this and it didn't really pull a lot of that noise out. And it's not as clear in the lettering around here as some of the others. The Photoshop noise reduction tool, I think, is pretty much useless in comparison. If you don't use any other tool, I would just use the Lightroom noise reduction tool or the Camera Raw noise reduction tool, which is the same engine as in Lightroom. Then we have Macphun, which has pulled a lot of this noise out. And lastly, Topaz. And if we toggle backwards and forwards between them, you can see the Topaz tool has left more sharpness in this lettering and still pulled out a significant amount of noise in that background. So I think the Topaz tool is actually better than the Macphun tool that I've been using, and it's going to be my go-to tool from now on, unless I have some really tricky noise that I need to fine-tune where the Macphun tool has more adjustments that I can use manually. So a quick and dirty comparison of 4 different ways of doing noise reduction. Neither a detailed tutorial nor a detailed product review of either Macphun or Topaz. But I hope you got an idea of the different ways that you can use those tools to reduce the noise in your photographs, and also that it is worth paying for plugins occasionally. The tools that are natively inside the Adobe products are okay. The Camera Raw and Lightroom tool, which is based on the same engine, works very well for color noise reduction. It's not as good at luminance, mostly because you have to push it too far and you can't get as much of the detail back as you want to without reintroducing some of that noise. But the 2 plugins, Macphun and Topaz, really give you that extra oomph when you want to reduce noise. And Topaz blows the rest out of the water in terms of the really easy way that it operates and the ability to create a really good, fine quality product in the end for your images. So if you're interested in buying any Topaz products, I'll put a link below for a 15% discount. And a quick stop press. Just as I was rendering the final version of this video, I noticed a message from YouTube telling me that Trevor Jones from Astro Backyard had just done a review of Topaz Labs DeNoise AI for use in astrophotography. If you haven't seen Trevor's work before, either his website or his YouTube channel, and you're interested in astrophotography, particularly deep sky photography, go and check it out. He does some fantastic work and I thoroughly recommend it. I'll put a link to that video below and I'll use it as my weekly video in the end screen. So if you've enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, click on the little bell to get notified when I do more videos. But remember, pixels are free, so get out there and shoot more when you're allowed to. But above all, please stay safe, stay healthy, and I'll see you again soon. Oh, Plymouth Gin and Mediterranean Tonic by Fever Tree. Really? Oh, please, send me some. Cheers.